I was 23 when everything cracked open. After losing my mom suddenly in a car accident, my world didn't just turn dark, it stayed that way. My dad remarried 2 years later. He needed companionship, and I get that now. But back then, all I could feel was betrayal. He married Karen, my stepmom, a woman just 10 years older than me. We didn't connect at first. I kept my distance while she tried to be kind, overcompensating for my coldness. But grief is a strange thing. It makes you push away the people trying to help, and cling to things you shouldn't. One night, after a huge argument with my dad about moving on and growing up, I stormed out to the back deck with a bottle of wine. Karen followed. It was late, and we were both emotionally raw. We started talking, really talking for the first time. About my mom, about loneliness, about guilt. She said, "Sometimes I think I'll always be second to her in your dad's heart." I replied, "You'll never be second to me." I didn't mean it the way it sounded. But the way she looked at me, I saw something shift. The weeks that followed were emotionally messy. Karen and I got closer, too close. Our conversations blurred into something intimate. One night, in the quiet of the kitchen, it happened. A moment where emotion overtook sense. We kissed. And I hated myself for it instantly. But it didn't stop there. The relationship, if you could even call it that, was filled with guilt, shame, secrecy, and emotional confusion. It wasn't about sex. It was about two broken people trying to feel whole, even just for a moment. It all came crashing down when my girlfriend, Elise, came over unexpectedly. She walked in on Karen and me in a moment of vulnerability, just holding each other, but it was enough. Elise left in shock. The secret was out. Karen told my dad everything. The fallout was nuclear. My dad didn't speak to me for months. Elise left me. Karen moved in with her sister. The emotional cost was unbearable. It took years to repair even a fraction of the damage. Therapy, time, space. Karen and I never spoke again. I don't even think it was love, we were just two grieving hearts that collided at the worst possible time. But what I learned is this. Infidelity isn't always about lust. Sometimes it's about loss. About needing connection so desperately that you forget the consequences. And sometimes, even if it feels real in the moment, it's built on pain, not love. Emotional vulnerability is often the unspoken gateway to infidelity, particularly in situations where individuals are grappling with grief, isolation, or emotional neglect. When a person experiences a significant emotional void, whether from the death of a loved one, a crumbling relationship, or the absence of meaningful connection, they become more susceptible to attachments that might otherwise seem inappropriate or unlikely. These attachments are rarely born from pure desire. Rather, they evolve from a place of emotional need and unresolved pain. In the story of My Stepmom Caught Me at the Wrong Time, both characters are navigating grief and loneliness, he, mourning the loss of his mother, and she, feeling like a second choice in a marriage overshadowed by memories. Their vulnerability is not just circumstantial, it's a psychological opening that allows for emotional entanglement to form under the guise of comfort and shared sadness. When emotional needs go unmet for long periods, people naturally begin to seek solace wherever it is available. In emotionally raw situations, what begins as empathy can quickly evolve into dependency. Words of comfort, a simple touch, or late-night conversations become moments of intimacy. They begin to fill the void left by the people or feelings that are no longer present. And when the emotional bond deepens, it can blur the lines between platonic support and romantic involvement. The stepmother figure, for example, might initially try to offer nurturing support in her new role within the family, but when she is met with mutual vulnerability and emotional openness, it creates a false sense of trust and understanding that mimics emotional intimacy. This can be intoxicating for both people, especially if their current relationships feel emotionally distant or stagnant. Unlike physical desire, emotional infidelity is more gradual, more insidious. It builds in moments of silence, in shared pain, in gazes that last a second too long. It's the conversations that go deeper than they should, the need to be heard and seen by someone who is not supposed to fill that role. In emotionally vulnerable states, people may rationalize their attachment as harmless because it's not immediately sexual. They tell themselves it's just connection, just understanding, just support. But emotional infidelity is often the precursor to physical infidelity. It lays the foundation by creating a parallel intimacy that begins to rival or even replace the one they should be maintaining in their primary relationship. What complicates this further is the emotional confusion it brings. It becomes hard to discern whether the feelings are genuine or simply a reaction to shared trauma. Emotional attachment during vulnerable times is rarely rooted in clarity. Instead, it emerges from psychological projections, the stepmother becoming a source of maternal comfort, or the stepson seeking the nurturing presence he lost. These roles are not consciously chosen, but emotionally constructed to satisfy unmet needs. The brain, in its effort to heal or cope, seeks out emotional anchors, even if they exist in morally complex or socially forbidden contexts. This makes such attachments even more dangerous, because the emotional pull feels profound and real, even if it's circumstantial and temporary. In the context of infidelity, especially within family-like dynamics, emotional vulnerability doesn't excuse the betrayal, but it does help explain it. People aren't always driven by lust or recklessness, sometimes they're just trying to survive the weight of their own loneliness. These kinds of emotional entanglements often don't result in lasting relationships. Instead, they leave behind damage, regret, and a trail of broken connections. Yet for the people involved, those moments feel honest, necessary, even healing until the truth shatters the illusion. And that's the true cost of emotional vulnerability. When it's left unspoken and unchecked, it creates temporary relief at the expense of long-term devastation. Blended families, by nature, come with a unique set of emotional dynamics that don't exist in traditional family structures. When roles shift and new individuals are introduced into familial spaces, especially in the wake of trauma like divorce or death, emotional boundaries often blur. Step-parents and stepchildren are placed in close emotional proximity without the natural foundation that biological relationships often carry. There's no organic bond formed through birth or shared history. Instead, they're expected to quickly adapt and build relationships based on situational necessity. In many cases, these relationships are marked by forced civility, strained politeness, or silent tension. However, in some instances, these strained beginnings can shift unexpectedly into intimacy when emotional need, unaddressed grief, or a desire for connection overrides the logical understanding of roles. The story of My Stepmom Caught Me at the Wrong Time is a perfect lens through which to examine the fragility of these familial boundaries. The stepson, still grieving the loss of his biological mother, sees his stepmother not just as an outsider, but as an unwanted replacement. There's a natural resistance to accept her presence, but underneath that resistance is unresolved pain and an absence of maternal care. The stepmother, on her end, may be feeling isolated within the family, walking on eggshells, trying to fill a role that no one wants her to have, while dealing with her own insecurities about being seen as the other woman in a space still haunted by the memory of a deceased wife. This emotional tension creates a mutual sense of displacement, where both parties feel out of place in the same home. As emotional conversations begin and shared vulnerabilities are exchanged, the once clear lines between parent figure and child can begin to blur. This is not always conscious. It begins subtly with a longer than usual conversation, a late-night glass of wine, or moments of comfort that take on a softness usually reserved for romantic or deeply personal relationships. These behaviors can be misinterpreted as trust or closeness, but without clear boundaries, they open the door to inappropriate emotional enmeshment. In such scenarios, neither party may initially recognize the danger of their growing attachment. Because there is no societal script for how a grieving young adult should bond with a young stepparent, they're left navigating emotional terrain without a map. In that confusion, roles shift, and sometimes, lines are crossed. Another element at play is the proximity and power dynamics within the household. Living under the same roof can intensify emotional connections, especially when privacy is limited and personal struggles are constantly on display. The stepmother, feeling undervalued by her husband and perhaps emotionally abandoned, might unconsciously begin to seek validation elsewhere. The stepson, already emotionally starved and longing for care, might begin to see her not as a mother figure, but as someone who truly listens and understands him. The duality of these roles, caretaker and confidant, authority figure and emotional equal, can be difficult to maintain, especially when both individuals are seeking something they feel they aren't receiving from their respective partners or family members. What's often overlooked in blended family scenarios is the emotional weight carried by both the stepparent and the stepchild. The world expects them to find balance quickly and without flaw. But emotional attachment doesn't respect social roles when those involved are vulnerable, wounded, and seeking comfort. The danger lies in how quickly those emotional connections can slip into inappropriate territory without either person truly recognizing the moment it began. When support turns into affection and affection evolves into something more, the familial lines become dangerously indistinct, leaving behind not just confusion but betrayal. These blurred boundaries are the root of many emotionally tangled infidelity stories within families, and they remind us that roles without emotional clarity can lead even well-meaning people into emotionally destructive territory. When infidelity is born from emotional entanglement rather than deliberate betrayal, it carries a unique kind of psychological burden, one that is less about lust and more about guilt, shame, and emotional confusion. For the individuals involved, especially in complex family dynamics like that of a stepchild and stepparent, the guilt doesn't wait until after the act. It often builds slowly, intensifying with every boundary crossed. It begins as a subtle awareness that something isn't quite right, a glance that lingers, a hand that stays a moment too long, a conversation that delves into territory meant for private partners, not quasi-family members. These moments may be brushed off initially, rationalized as innocent or nothing serious, but deep down, both individuals often sense the emotional tightrope they're walking. This internal tension creates a constant hum of anxiety and self-reproach that never fully fades. Guilt in these scenarios isn't just about the act of betrayal, it's about betraying the role one is supposed to play. A stepson may feel like he's desecrating the memory of his biological mother or disrespecting the trust of his father, while the stepmother may feel like she's violating both the family unit and her own moral boundaries. Unlike in a typical affair where the participants may feel distant from those affected, infidelity within the family orbit feels immediate and intensely personal. Every interaction at the dinner table, every passing comment, carries the weight of the unspoken secret. The emotional labor it takes to maintain the facade becomes exhausting. It erodes one's sense of identity and integrity. Over time, the guilt transforms into shame, a deeper, more internalized emotion that says, "This is not just something I did. This is who I am." Shame has a way of isolating people. It convinces them they are unworthy of forgiveness, unworthy of love, and too broken to be seen fully. As the secret festers, it distorts reality. The participants may begin to see themselves as fundamentally flawed, and that perception influences every choice they make going forward. It can destroy romantic relationships, fuel depression, and fracture familial ties beyond repair. The longer the secret is kept, the heavier it becomes. It impacts the way they speak, the way they move, and even how they view others, particularly those they've hurt, even if the harm remains unknown to them. There's a paranoia that develops, the constant fear of being discovered, of the truth slipping out in an unguarded moment, of someone noticing the shift in dynamics. That fear doesn't just linger, it takes root. Keeping the secret can become a trauma of its own. In some cases, it leads to self-sabotage. The person may withdraw emotionally from others or lash out unexpectedly. They may confess the secret not out of a desire to come clean, but because the burden of carrying it becomes unbearable. The weight of the secret doesn't stay in isolation, it bleeds into every part of life, clouding judgment and fueling impulsive decisions. It can make people cling to the wrong relationships or push away the right ones. And most painfully, it can permanently alter the way they view themselves, not as someone who made a mistake, but as someone unworthy of trust or redemption. The psychological weight of secrets tied to emotional infidelity, especially within a family context, can be more corrosive than the infidelity itself. The shame is layered: shame for feeling, shame for acting, shame for hiding, and shame for hurting. Even if no one else knows, the individuals involved carry the knowledge with them like a scar that won't fade. And perhaps the most haunting part is knowing that what began as an innocent connection, a desire to be seen and comforted, ended up becoming a wound that reshaped not only their relationships but their very sense of self. The moment of confrontation in any emotionally entangled infidelity is a defining one. It shatters illusions, exposes hidden truths, and often brings irreversible consequences. In cases where the infidelity is emotionally complex, like a stepson and stepmother caught in an inappropriate relationship, the confrontation doesn't just end the secret, it detonates the entire emotional structure around it. When the truth finally surfaces, either through discovery or confession, there's a ripple effect that impacts everyone involved: partners, parents, children, even extended family members who may not fully understand the details but can sense that something sacred has been broken. The confrontation becomes a moment where reality is forced into view, and no one walks away from it untouched. Unlike situations where infidelity is driven purely by impulse, emotionally rooted affairs carry deeper betrayals. The pain isn't just about sexual disloyalty, it's about emotional intimacy that was supposed to be exclusive. When someone realizes that their spouse or family member has formed a deep, secret connection with someone they trusted, the betrayal runs even deeper. In blended families, where relationships already come with tension and fragility, the confrontation often causes long-standing bonds to fracture entirely. A father finding out that his wife and his son, two people he is supposed to love and trust the most, shared a forbidden emotional and physical connection, is more than heartbreaking. It's a complete collapse of trust, structure, and identity. He may question his entire role in the family, wonder how he missed the signs, and blame himself for creating the conditions that allowed such a situation to evolve. For those directly involved, the confrontation is often met with a mixture of panic, remorse, and disorientation. The illusion that they could keep it secret, that no one would get hurt if they were careful, is immediately shattered. Suddenly, their private world becomes public, and they are forced to face the consequences of their choices. Friendships may dissolve, romantic partners may walk away without a word, and reputations may suffer lasting damage. The emotional consequences are often harder to navigate than the logistical ones. There's no manual for how to repair a family torn apart by betrayal, especially when the betrayal involved crossing roles that are considered inviolable, like those between a parent and a child, or between spouses in a household. Even if forgiveness is eventually extended, things rarely return to the way they were. There's a permanent shift in how trust functions within the family, and in how people view each other. For some, the confrontation leads to estrangement, a long, painful separation where communication ceases and relationships are left to wither. For others, it may begin a long journey of repair, but that path is usually marked by therapy, deep emotional processing, and difficult conversations that bring up years of buried emotion. In either case, the confrontation is not just an end, but a pivot point where every person involved is forced to redefine who they are in relation to the others. The consequences of such betrayals are often unpredictable. Sometimes the person who was cheated on walks away with strength, rebuilding their life with clearer boundaries. Other times, they spiral into emotional shutdown, unable to trust again. The individuals involved in the affair may find themselves isolated, not only from others but from each other, as the emotional weight of the situation becomes too heavy to carry together. What once felt like a safe place and emotionally comforting connection becomes a source of deep shame and regret. The emotional consequences of confronting infidelity in a family setting aren't limited to heartbreak, they involve identity crises, psychological trauma, and long-term relational damage. The confrontation strips away any justification, exposes the raw truth, and forces each person to choose whether they will attempt to rebuild or let it all fall apart.